Boy Scout group meets Wendigo. This story takes place in 1975 in the Mark Twain National Forest. I and my friends had joined the Cub Scouts, that's the level below Boy Scouts, and we were very disappointed because the Cub Scouts might as well have been called the get-together on Tuesdays to do something really lame Scouts. We were nearly 6 months in and still had not been on even one single camp out. Heck, we hadn't even been on a hike. All we ever did was meet on Tuesdays where we would show our project that we had been assigned the week previous. Straight up, it sucked. We wanted to camp out. Sleep out under the stars. Make a campfire. Gather the firewood. All that stuff. Fishing, and maybe even some hunting would have been outstanding. Still, we did none of that. I recall seeing the TV advertisements for G.I. Joe, or a quick setup camping tent, etc. All I wanted was to go out into the woods with my friends and live like they did on the TV advertisements. Us against nature. No prisoners taken. Well, after that excruciating 6-month period that was really only a month, we were fed up with Boy Scouts and had decided if we wanted satisfaction that it would be up to us to get it. So we made the effort and finally talked our fathers into taking us camping out in the woods for the weekend. Everybody was excited beyond description. The perks we were going to enjoy by not doing the campout through the actual Boy Scouts made it possible to be able or allowed to bring our pellet guns and other assorted outdoor man paraphernalia, which most certainly would not have been allowed in the real Cub Scout campouts. Like my Rambo Bowie knife complete with a compass built into the end of the handle. This was real outdoor, tough guy stuff. Fishing poles and coolers packed full of various foods and ice packets to keep it all cold were loaded into the vans. We were taking 2 to allow for hauling the supplies. Our pellet guns were the last things to go into the vans so they could be the first to come out. A guy needs protection when out in the woods. Our first night and the following day were everything we had hoped for and more. We did target shooting and then went fishing and actually caught our dinner, which the fathers were all too happy to clean and cook up for supper. We had fried potatoes cooked with onions to go with our fried fish. Then we all settled in for toasting marshmallows. There were 6 of us boys and 4 dads. The fathers took turns telling us scary stories until we were ready for sleep. Next we caught and cooked more fish for supper. When we had finished, there was still some light left in the day, but there was a storm that had moved in quickly and it soon began to rain. One of the fathers said he knew of some caves not too far from our location. If we wanted, we could move operation over to them to stay out of the rain. This was agreed upon, and the next thing we were moving everything to the caves. Mr. Shetland had been correct. There were 2 cave entrances that were right next to each other. We quickly explored the 2 options and chose the cave which allowed more room for us to spread out and sleep. Yes, it was a little spooky, but we were right at the entrance to the cave, so it wasn't like we were in total darkness. At least not until that night. Firewood was the most important thing on our to-do list. Each father took a couple of kids, and the ones left over stayed at the camp to work on the fire and get things set up for cooking. It was there we cooked the last of our fish, which we supplemented some honey-baked ham, which was much more popular than the fish. Outside, the rain was continuing to fall. The day was really gray and wet. I would tell you it quickly began to get boring sitting inside the mouth of that cave looking out at the rain falling, but excitement found us. At first it was exciting. Later it became very scary. The whole camping trip lost its appeal later. Let me explain. The 6 of us kids were sitting there looking out at the rain falling when one of the kids spotted some movement in the not terribly far distance. This was brought to the attention of the fathers, who gathered at the front of the cave to see what we were talking about. They were all relaxed and laughing as they watched the movement get closer and closer. Eventually they were able to make out more than just a shape, and that was when everything and everybody got real quiet. Us kids had not been looking the close way that our fathers were watching, or else we would have been terrified long before we had it happen. When the creature was close enough, we could see it had antlers and that it was walking on 2 feet. Everything went sour. One of the boys who was with us that had not had his father come along was suddenly not happy at all about his father being absent. It was all my dad could do to get him calmed down enough so they could return their attention to what that thing was that had been coming closer. Now, because of the near fit the kid almost threw, nobody knew where or what had happened to the thing that was coming our way. It was one scary-looking piece of work. It had the antlers and head of a deer, but the skin on its face was very tight, drawn you might say, and its eyes were sunken and just little dots of amber surrounded by bloodshot veins that were remindful of two sunny-side-up eggs swimming in a pool of ketchup. It had a broad set of shoulders that tapered down to a very trim waist. The ribs of this creature showed through its tattered-looking skin, practically screaming to anyone that would listen this creature was on the verge of starvation and that its hunger was evident. The cave sat up a little higher than the rest of the landscape, so our fathers watched as the creature made its way up the incline toward where we were in the caves. Our fathers had retrieved our pellet guns, and after overhearing their plan I realized they were running a bluff. My father had said that if this thing was like most any other animal in the wild, then it was going to recognize a gun when it sees one. He said as long as they did not actually fire a gun at the creature, then it was not likely to understand these guns were much less powerful than the ones which they were accustomed. He said if they could keep the creature afraid to make any sort of straightforward attack for fear of getting a point-blank gunshot wound, then they had a good chance of surviving the night. Because that was exactly what was going to be required. We would have been stupid to try and make our way back to the vehicles in the dark. It was a wet night and we expected to arrive with all 6 kids and 4 dads still intact. Our best chance was to stay put, protect our flanks and ride out the rainy night from our current location. Which is exactly what we did. The creature again made itself known, this time it was not far away at all. It had stopped advancing and now was staying a comfortable distance away from the entrance to the cave. Despite not advancing, it also was not retreating. It stayed about 20 paces away at all times. In fact, it was close enough that the men discussed shooting it in the head with the pellet guns pumped up to highest velocity. My dad and Mr. Shetland were very against the idea because they both argued that the best and basically only defense they had that they knew was effective was the bluff. What would happen if they shot all the guns at once at their highest power and it did nothing to the creature? Before going any further, I will note that I brought my father's .25 caliber pellet gun in place of my own, which was the standard size pellet. A .25 caliber pellet is bigger than a .22 bullet but smaller than a .38. The .22 is the basic smallest size caliber bullet sold, and the .38 is the size bullet that used to be the standard issue for most cops. These days the standard issue is probably a bit bigger. The point being that we did have a weapon which was considerably more powerful than the average BB gun. Still, the creature with the antlers and the tightly drawn skin, sunken yellow eyes swimming in pools of blood, stood about 7 feet tall. It was not small by any measure. My dad was aware that the .25 caliber pellet gun was alleged to be capable of killing a fox at a 50-yard distance. That is quite impressive, but is it true? We were uncertain. He and Mr. Shetland argued that they should continue the bluff since it was working so far. Ride that wave as far as it took us, and then, and only then, if the creature was still hanging around and seemingly adamant at getting one of us, that we would then use the guns to their fullest and most violent potential. There was a short argument that waiting would not present the opportunity for a good clean shot like choosing to go on the offensive would provide. Both my father and Mr. Shetland thought about it for a while, but in the end they both said they felt that getting a good clean shot was not off the table if they chose to wait. It was just a matter of timing. Plus, even if they did not take the shot, they still stood a better than good chance of being able to win any fight with the creature. My dad argued that if it was so sure it could take us, that it would already have made a move. He felt it was waiting for us to show a weakness. Maybe catch one of us sneaking out to do a bathroom visit. Basically act the way that almost all predators do in nature. Hang around and look for the weakest of the group to stray a little too far. It was determined that the men would do 2 turns of guard duty. 2 of the men would stay up the first half the night, the second 2 staying up the remaining hours. My father won the second shift, and though I tried to stay awake, in the end I fell asleep, and when I woke up it was morning. The creature was gone and we were safe to travel back to our vehicles and then go home. On the way home we got to hear what happened in the night. I guess the first half the night was just a lot of voices, many of which the men said they knew, or were related to, that were calling them to come out into the woods. Of course, neither man was about to have anything to do with that baloney. Next, it was my father and Mr. Shetland's turn to keep watch. This is as my father told the story. When we were woke to take our shifts, the night had seen an end to the rain, but it was still very wet, the way a night is apt to be after it has been raining for a long period. Looking out the mouth of the cave, you couldn't tell if there was an audience big enough to fill a football stadium or just one very emaciated creature sporting antlers and a rib cage that looked like it should have been fed weeks before. You just couldn't see anything but dark blackness. 2 campfires burned, one on each side of the mouth of the cave. They were far enough in to not be rained out, but were also far enough out that the smoke they created did not drift back into the cave itself, causing everyone to become smoked out. The fires were close enough to each other to be a force for stopping anything attempting to enter the cave. They would not stop anything, but they would make it so it needed to turn sideways in order to maybe slip past the heat of the fires without getting burned. A matter which would or should be of extra concern to a creature which had such wide shoulders. He said it was quite an experience because the creature apparently was so starved it did not possess the self-control to hide itself back in the woods, so to perhaps ambush one of us if we went out there. The look in those yellow eyes was enough by itself to tell us that this thing was so starving that it was barely able to keep itself from coming closer to us because it knows we would have let go our guns. It reminded me of a very hungry, no, let's say starving dog, looking in a butcher shop window at all the steaks waiting to be bought. But as hungry as the creature was, and it surely was hungry, it was more afraid, more cowardly toward the thought of us killing it, than satisfying its dire hunger. That is the Wendigo for you. A coward that sought out the dark magic and then refused to leave it alone until the great spirits punished the medicine man by turning him into the Wendigo. A creature that will forever know hunger, no matter how much it eats, because the more it devours the hungrier it is destined to become due to it growing in size. Its size will always demand more than what its body had currently taken in. Thus, even as the monster grows in size, so does its suffering for a full belly. It is a tragic snowball effect which ensures the Wendigo will never know peace, never be able to stop its relentless search for flesh. I suspect the thing that was after us was desperate and perhaps not even thinking clearly, because there was no way it was going to get a shot at any one of us without the others attacking it in full force. Of course, we will never know. Maybe it did have the ability to defeat all of us, but not to defeat a rifle. Maybe that bluff truly was what kept us all safe that night. It certainly was not the worst idea, since we all survived the night. Camping out time was over after that night in the cave. We didn't let the incident prevent us from enjoying the outdoors, but not one of the 6 of us boys were in a hurry to go on an overnight camp out again. I think I did eventually go on a few overnight campouts, and I know when I reached age 18 that I had many nights spent sleeping out under the stars. Now that I think about it, however, all those nights were spent fishing, so we were always near a body of water. Perhaps it, the creature, is not a fan of the water, therefore overnight campouts near bodies of water might be the safer choice. Thanks for visiting. Please subscribe and or hit any of the other buttons which help channels on YouTube. It is appreciated. Please note that images provided on the channel, at safe distance, are provided by artificial intelligence image creators, as are the vast majority of all the images or videos you see on the internet these days. All the quality creators of fake images that exist these days, it seems necessary to point out to viewers that the websites which claim, or more likely do not claim one way or the other, that images on their site is something real, it is about a 98% chance they are lying to you. The more outrageous the image or video is to watch, the more likely it was created and is a fake. So what I am saying is that websites which provide you photos as proof of something are the websites which you should trust the least. Especially if they are consistent about providing media which is controversial. I seek out stories which have more substance to them than the usual, "Hey, I just drove past Bigfoot on the highway" type stories, which admittedly are probably the more likely to be true stories, but let's face it, they get boring pretty fast. So if I come upon a story which has some meat to it and it is possible, then I present it for you to decide, because if you get down to it, if the situation is possible to have really happened, then it is as likely to have actually happened as is likely the cryptid in question is to actually exist.